Album Cover Art, the podcast. I would like to start at the beginning, basically. The album cover, where did the album cover come from? You can go over the history of the album and the record and all of that, but the cover, what on earth, who came up with that idea? Well, it turns out a guy by the name of Alex Steinwieiss is the inventor of the album cover. He was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1917. Now, Alex's father was a shoe designer and his mother was a seamstress, so you could say, creativity, that was in his blood to begin with. When he was in high school, Alex studied under graphic design educator named Leon Friend at the Abraham Lincoln High School in Brooklyn, and even then his fellow students marveled at his talent and how he could just come up with letters with the stroke of a brush. Then after high school, Alex went to the Parsons School of Design, a very prestigious school of design in New York City. He graduated from Parsons School of Design in 1937. He was 21 years old, and his goal was to become, a good sign painter. There's work for a good sign painter. Remember, it's 1937, it's the 30s. The Depression is still a huge factor. It's a black and white world, really. There's no color photography. The Wizard of Oz, one of the first color films, doesn't even come out until 1939. Music, it was sold in plain packaging. You would get a 10-inch book, maybe 3 or 4 cardboard sleeves. You would slip the 78s in there. It was brown. It was plain. And that was about it. Some albums were given some colored artwork, but only a rare few. They were separately printed and sometimes just pasted on the back or even the inside of the cover. But by and large, everything was plain and brown, and mainly due to cost, for that matter. There wasn't color, and to print color prints for an album just didn't make sense financially in 1937. Now, after Alex Steinwieiss graduated from the Parsons School of Design in 1937, he got a job designing posters for Joseph Binder. Now, Joseph Binder was known for using flat colors and kind of simplified human figures, which were popular graphics at the time in the late 1930s. Then, about a year later, in 1938, a man by the name of William Paley, William Paley, who owned the Columbia Broadcasting System, one of the world's most dominant communication empires, William Paley bought Columbia Records. Now, William Paley then put his friend Edward Wallerstein in charge of Columbia Records. Now, Wallerstein decided Columbia needed to improve visually somehow, so he hired Alex Steinwieiss as the very first art director for Columbia Records in 1939. Again, records are being printed in plain brown packaging for the most part, mainly due to cost. It cost a lot to produce color prints in 1939, but Alex had an idea. He had been designing posters, colorful posters, and he wanted to produce a collection of 4 78 RPM singles on a book page format with their own unique design on the front. He wanted to make an album cover. Well, it took a little convincing, but Edward Wallerstein reluctantly agreed to the proposal by his newly appointed art director, and so in 1940, the very first album cover was on the release of the album Smash Song Hits by Rodgers and Hart. It's a pretty simple design, just the names of the record company, the artist, the album title on the marquee for the Imperial Theater. Then there's a red circle in the middle, which looks like a red label, the color of the Columbia Records label. And then behind the marquee, big red circular lines. Basically, it looks like the marquee is on a neon red record. And if you're Canadian, the design looks a lot like the Sam the Record Man sign. I'll show you that. Check out the YouTube channel. Just go to my website, russman.ca, and you can see the pictures of the albums. And basically, almost immediately, sales of albums with covers soared over the plain covers. And within a couple of years, covers were being put on most records released, all thanks to Alex Steinwieiss. Now, during World War II, Alex left Columbia Records for a job at the Navy's Training and Development Center in New York City. He produced teaching materials and cautionary posters for the war effort. Then, after the war, Alex freelanced designing for Columbia for some time. And then, when the company was going to introduce the new 33 RPM album in 1948, they needed to come up with a cover package that didn't damage the vinyl. See, the old envelopes for the original shellac records, the original 78s, they're more like sandpaper. To the newer vinyl records, they scratched them all up. So they turned to Alex Steinwieiss. Alex came up with a design. Craft paper kind of folded together like a board, 2 glue flaps, a printed paper cover, and that is the design that became the industry standard for album covers that remains to this day. Alex eventually left Columbia Records in the early 50s. He continued designing freelance until around 1973. Now, in his time, he designed in excess of 2,500 album covers, including the very first one. The album cover exists thanks to Alex Steinwieiss. Thanks for listening to the Album Cover Art Podcast, which is simulcast on YouTube. Just go to the website russman.ca.